You're just confused, Mom. You don't remember things clearly anymore. Those words still echo in my mind even now, 3 months later. My own son, standing in my kitchen, speaking to me like I was some senile old woman who couldn't tell reality from fantasy. What he didn't know was that every cruel word, every lie, every moment of his deception was being recorded by the security cameras I'd installed just weeks before. When that footage finally came to light, it didn't just expose his theft. It shattered every illusion I had about the person I'd raised. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Catherine Walsh, and at 62 years old, I thought I understood my life pretty well. I lived in a modest ranch house on Maple Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa, the same house where I'd raised my son Marcus for 28 years. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with retirees like myself and young families just starting out. I'd been widowed for 8 years, ever since my husband Robert passed from a heart attack, and I'd learned to find contentment in simple routines. Every morning, I'd make my coffee in the same blue ceramic mug Robert had given me for our 15th anniversary, tend to my tomato garden in the backyard, and check on Mrs. Henderson next door, who was 93 and still living independently. Afternoons were for reading mystery novels on my front porch swing, and evenings meant watching the news and working on crossword puzzles. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful, and after 40 years of working as a school secretary, peace felt like a luxury I'd earned. My pension from the school district wasn't huge, but combined with Robert's life insurance and Social Security, I managed comfortably. I owned my house outright, drove a reliable Honda Civic that was 12 years old but ran perfectly, and had managed to save about $35,000 over the years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make me feel secure and independent. Marcus had always been my pride and joy, even when he made choices I didn't understand. He dropped out of college during his junior year to pursue what he called entrepreneurial opportunities, which seemed to involve a series of failed business ventures and get-rich-quick schemes. There was the online t-shirt company that folded after 6 months, the cryptocurrency mining operation that ate up his savings, and most recently, a food truck business that had gone bankrupt within a year. Despite his failures, Marcus had a way of making each new venture sound like the opportunity of a lifetime. He was charismatic, confident, and had inherited his father's gift for making people believe in him. Even when his latest business crashed and burned, he'd bounce back with infectious optimism about the next big thing. I admired his persistence, even when I worried about his lack of stability. Marcus lived about 40 minutes away in Des Moines, where he rented a small apartment and worked part-time at an electronics store while plotting his next business venture. He visited every few weeks, usually staying for Sunday dinner, and regaling me with stories about his latest ideas. These visits were the highlight of my quiet life, and I looked forward to hearing about his adventures in the bigger city. That all changed last spring, when I started having what I can only describe as senior moments. Little things at first, forgetting where I'd put my reading glasses, losing track of what day of the week it was, or standing in the grocery store trying to remember what I'd come to buy. My doctor, Dr. Martinez, assured me this was perfectly normal for someone my age, especially someone living alone. Stress and isolation can affect memory, she explained during my annual checkup. Have you considered getting more social interaction? Maybe joining a book club or volunteering somewhere? I brushed off her concerns, but privately, the memory lapses worried me. My mother had developed dementia in her 70s, and I'd watched her slow decline with heartbreak and terror. The thought of following the same path kept me awake at night, checking and rechecking that I'd locked the doors, turned off the stove, and set my alarm clock properly. The incidents became more frequent as summer approached. I'd find myself standing in my kitchen with no memory of why I'd gone there. I'd start to call Marcus, then forget what I'd wanted to tell him. Twice I drove to the grocery store and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, unable to remember what I needed to buy. The worst episode happened on a Tuesday in June when I woke up on my living room couch at 3 in the morning, fully dressed, with no recollection of falling asleep there. That's when I made the decision to install security cameras around my house. It wasn't because I was worried about break-ins in our safe neighborhood, but because I was worried about myself. I needed to know what I was doing during these memory gaps, whether I was putting myself in danger somehow. If my mind was starting to fail me, I wanted evidence of what was really happening. I called Tech Secure Solutions, a local company that specialized in home security systems. The owner, a patient man named Dave Rodriguez, came out the next day to assess my needs. I explained my situation honestly, that I was having memory issues and wanted to monitor my own behavior for safety reasons. "That's actually pretty smart, Mrs. Walsh," Dave said as he walked around my property. "A lot of our senior clients use cameras for exactly that purpose. It gives them peace of mind and helps their families keep an eye on things too." We decided on a basic system with 4 cameras, one covering the front door and porch, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one covering the back door and part of the yard. The cameras were small and discreet, and they recorded continuously to a digital storage system in my basement. Dave showed me how to access the footage on my laptop if I ever needed to review what had happened during a memory lapse. "The system will keep about 6 weeks of footage before it starts recording over the old stuff," he explained. "And if you ever need help accessing it, just call our customer service line." I felt better immediately after the installation. Even if my memory was failing, I'd have a record of my activities. If I did something dangerous during a confused episode, the cameras would show me what happened. It was like having a safety net for my aging brain. Marcus visited the weekend after the cameras were installed, and I debated whether to tell him about them. Part of me was embarrassed about needing to monitor myself, but another part thought he should know in case of emergency. During our usual Sunday dinner of pot roast and mashed potatoes, I decided to mention it casually. "I had some security cameras installed this week," I said as I passed him the green beans. Marcus looked up from his plate, surprised. "Security cameras? Mom, this neighborhood is safer than a church. What's got you worried about break-ins?" I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "It's not about break-ins, honey. I've been having some memory issues lately, little lapses here and there. The cameras are more for my own peace of mind, so I can see what I was doing if I have a confused spell." Marcus set down his fork and studied my face with concern. "Memory issues? What kind of memory issues? Have you talked to Dr. Martinez about this?" I explained about the senior moments, the forgetfulness, the episode of waking up on the couch. Marcus listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about when these incidents happened and how often. His concern seemed genuine, and I felt relieved to have someone taking my worries seriously. "Mom, I think the cameras are a great idea," he said finally. "And I want you to promise me you'll call if you have any more serious episodes. Maybe I should start checking on you more often." "You don't need to worry about me, Marcus. I'm managing just fine." "I know you are, but you're my only parent now. I can't lose you too." His voice caught slightly, and I reached across the table.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
To squeeze his hand. "You're not going to lose me, sweetheart. I'm just being cautious." Marcus started visiting more frequently after that conversation, sometimes twice a week instead of his usual every other weekend. He'd call to check on me every few days, asking how I was feeling and whether I'd had any more memory episodes. His increased attention was touching, and I felt grateful to have such a caring son during this uncertain time. The memory lapses continued sporadically through the summer. Some weeks I'd be sharp as a tack, completing crossword puzzles in record time and remembering every detail of my daily activities. Other weeks I'd find myself confused and disoriented, losing hours at a time with no clear recollection of what I'd done. During these episodes, I'd review the security footage and usually find myself doing mundane things, reading on the couch, puttering in the garden, or simply sitting at my kitchen table staring into space. In late July, something happened that shook me more than any previous episode. I discovered that $200 was missing from the coffee tin where I kept my household cash. I always kept about $300 in small bills for groceries, gas, and miscellaneous expenses, and I was meticulous about tracking how much was there. But when I went to pay my lawn care service, I found only $117 in the tin. I searched my entire house, thinking I might have moved the money during a confused spell and forgotten where I'd put it. I checked every drawer, every pocket, every possible hiding place. But the cash was simply gone. When I couldn't find it anywhere, a horrible thought occurred to me. What if I'd thrown it away during one of my memory lapses? What if my confusion was worse than I'd realized? I spent an entire afternoon going through my trash cans and even checking my neighbors' garbage, feeling increasingly panicked and embarrassed. Mrs. Henderson found me digging through the recycling bin at the curb and gently suggested I might want to talk to my doctor about increasing my medication. Sometimes when people are stressed about their memory, they become more forgetful, she said kindly. It's like a vicious cycle, dear. That evening, I called Marcus in tears, telling him about the missing money and my frantic search. He drove over immediately, arriving within an hour with groceries and a calm demeanor that instantly made me feel better. "Mom, don't panic about this," he said, as he helped me put away the groceries. "Memory issues can make people do all kinds of things they don't remember. You might have spent the money on something and forgotten, or maybe you moved it somewhere safe and it'll turn up eventually. But Marcus, I'm so careful with money. I write down every expense, every withdrawal. I can't find any record of spending that cash." Marcus put his arms around me in a comforting hug. "We'll figure this out, okay? Maybe you should start keeping your cash in the bank instead of around the house. It's safer that way, and you'll have records of every transaction." He helped me set up automatic bill pay for my utilities and suggested I start using my debit card for everyday expenses instead of cash. This way, everything will be tracked, and you won't have to worry about losing money during a confused episode. His practical solutions made perfect sense, and I felt foolish for not thinking of them myself. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, grateful once again for my thoughtful son. August brought a heat wave that kept me indoors most days, running the air conditioning and trying to stay comfortable. My memory seemed more stable during this period, with fewer confused episodes and no more missing money incidents. I started to hope that my problems were temporary, maybe related to stress or the medication adjustments Dr. Martinez had made. Marcus continued his frequent visits, often bringing takeout dinner so I wouldn't have to cook in the heat. He'd stay for hours, watching television with me, or helping with household tasks that had become more challenging. Sometimes he'd work on his laptop while I read, claiming he was developing another business plan, but seemed content just to spend time in my company. "You know, Mom," he said one evening as we watched a cooking show together, "I've been thinking about moving back to Cedar Falls. Des Moines is expensive, and I miss being close to family." The idea filled me with joy. Having Marcus nearby would ease so many of my worries about living alone with memory issues. "That would be wonderful, honey, but are there enough opportunities for your business ventures here? I'm starting to think that maybe I should focus on more stable work for a while. All these startup ideas haven't exactly panned out, and I'm not getting any younger. Maybe it's time to think about a regular job with benefits and a steady paycheck." This was the most mature conversation I'd ever had with Marcus about his career choices, and I was proud of his growing wisdom. We spent the evening looking at rental listings in Cedar Falls, discussing neighborhoods and apartment options. Marcus seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of living closer to home. In early September, another incident shattered my growing confidence. I went to check my savings account balance at the bank and discovered that someone had made a withdrawal of $500 from my account 3 days earlier. According to the transaction record, the withdrawal had been made at an ATM in Des Moines using my debit card and PIN number. I stared at the bank statement in complete confusion. I hadn't been to Des Moines in months, and I certainly hadn't made any large cash withdrawals. My debit card was in my purse where it always was, and I'd never written down my PIN number anywhere. Yet somehow someone had accessed my account. The bank teller, a young woman named Jessica who'd helped me before, looked at the transaction details with a puzzled expression. "Mrs. Walsh, this withdrawal was definitely made with your card and PIN. Are you sure you didn't make it yourself?" Sometimes when people are dealing with memory issues. Her implication was clear, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment. "I understand what you're suggesting, but I know I didn't make this withdrawal. I haven't been to Des Moines recently, and I would never take out that much cash at once." Jessica suggested I speak with the bank manager about filing a fraud report, but when Mr. Thompson reviewed my account, he seemed skeptical about my claims. "Mrs. Walsh, I have to be honest with you. This transaction was made with your card and the correct PIN during normal business hours. Our fraud department would need substantial evidence to reverse this charge." "What kind of evidence?" "Security footage showing someone else using your card. evidence that your card was stolen, documentation of your whereabouts at the time of the transaction. Without something like that, it's very difficult to prove fraud when the correct PIN was used. I left the bank feeling frustrated and confused. How could someone have my PIN number? I'd never shared it with anyone, never written it down, never entered it anywhere someone could see it. The only explanation that made sense was also the most frightening. Maybe I really had made the withdrawal during a memory lapse and simply couldn't remember it. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, determined to check the security footage from 3 days ago. If I'd driven to Des Moines and back, surely the cameras would show me leaving and returning home. I accessed the camera system and scrolled through the footage from the day in question, watching myself go about my normal routine. The footage showed me having breakfast, reading on the porch, working in my garden, eating lunch, taking a nap, and watching television in the evening. There was no sign that I'd left the house at all that day, let alone driven to Des Moines to make an ATM withdrawal. The timestamp on the ATM transaction was 2:47 p.m., and the security footage clearly showed me watering my tomato plants at that exact time. This evidence should have relieved me, proving that I hadn't made the withdrawal myself. Instead, it filled me with a deeper confusion. If I hadn't made the withdrawal, and if my card had never left my purse, how had someone else accessed my account? It seemed impossible, but the footage didn't lie. I called Marcus immediately, practically sobbing with frustration and fear. Something's happening to me, and I don't understand what it is. My mind feels like it's playing tricks on me. Marcus arrived within an hour, finding me at my kitchen table surrounded by bank statements and printouts from the security footage. I explained everything: the missing cash, the ATM withdrawal, the evidence that I'd been home the entire time. Marcus reviewed everything carefully, asking detailed questions about my daily routine and security procedures. His thoughtful analysis helped me feel less crazy, like there might be a logical explanation for these bizarre incidents. "Mom, this is really strange," he admitted after studying the bank statement. "But let's think about this logically. Is it possible that you have 2 debit cards for the same account, maybe an old one that you forgot about?" I was certain I only had 1 card, but Marcus suggested we call the bank's customer service line to double-check. The representative confirmed that only 1 active debit card was associated with my account, issued 2 years ago when my previous card expired. "What about online banking?" Marcus asked. "Could someone have transferred money electronically and then withdrawn it from a different account?" We spent 2 hours going through every possible explanation, but nothing made sense. My online banking showed no transfers, no suspicious activity other than the single ATM withdrawal. My debit card had never left my possession, and I'd never shared my PIN with anyone. "Mom, I think we need to file a police report," Marcus said finally. "This sounds like some kind of sophisticated fraud, maybe identity theft. The police deal with this stuff all the time." The idea of involving the police made me nervous. What if they thought I was just a confused old woman making false accusations? What if they decided I really had made the withdrawal and simply couldn't remember it? Marcus sensed my hesitation. "I'll go with you to the police station. We'll bring all the evidence, the bank statements, the security footage, everything. They need to take this seriously." Having Marcus's support gave me the courage to move forward. We made an appointment to speak with a detective the following Monday, and Marcus promised to take time off work to accompany me. For the first time in days, I felt like someone believed me and was willing to help me fight for the truth. Over the weekend, Marcus helped me change my PIN number and set up additional security alerts on my bank account. We also decided to move most of my savings into a certificate of deposit that would require my physical presence to access, making it harder for anyone to steal large amounts of money. "Until we figure out what's happening, we need to protect your assets," Marcus explained as we filled out the paperwork at the bank. "CDs aren't as convenient as regular savings, but they're much more secure." His financial advice was sound, and I appreciated his practical approach to protecting my money. Even if we never solved the mystery of the fraudulent withdrawal, at least my remaining savings would be safe from future theft. Detective Reynolds at the Cedar Falls Police Department was more helpful than I'd expected. She listened to our story without judgment, reviewed all our evidence, and agreed that something suspicious was happening. "Mrs. Walsh, I've seen cases like this before, she said as she made copies of our bank statements. Usually it involves someone close to the victim who has access to personal information. Have you given your PIN number to anyone recently? Family members? Caregivers? Close friends? I assured her that I'd never shared my PIN with anyone, not even Marcus. Detective Reynolds nodded thoughtfully and made notes in her file. We'll request security footage from the ATM, location, and see if we can identify who made the withdrawal. In the meantime, I recommend you continue monitoring your accounts closely and report any additional suspicious activity immediately. The investigation gave me hope that we'd eventually get answers, but it also raised uncomfortable questions. If the theft involved someone close to me, who could it be? I had very few people in my life with access to personal information, and I trusted all of them completely. Detective Reynolds' words echoed in my mind as Marcus and I drove home from the police station. Someone close to the victim who has access to personal information. I tried to think of anyone who might have observed me entering my PIN at a store or restaurant, but I was always careful to shield the keypad with my hand when making purchases. Don't overthink this, Mom, Marcus said as he walked me to my front door. Identity theft can happen to anyone these days. Criminals have all kinds of sophisticated ways to steal personal information. His reassurance helped calm my nerves, but that night I lay awake thinking about Detective Reynolds' words. By morning, I'd convinced myself that the detective was just covering all the bases, not seriously suggesting that someone I knew was stealing from me. The ATM security footage took 3 weeks to obtain, and when Detective Reynolds called to discuss the results, her tone was more serious than before. Mrs. Walsh, I need you to come to the station to view the footage. And I'd recommend bringing someone with you for support. Marcus drove me to the police station that afternoon, both of us anxious about what the security footage might reveal. Detective Reynolds led us to a small conference room with a computer screen and explained what we were about to see. The footage shows someone using your debit card at the ATM on September 4th at 2:47 p.m. The person appears to know your PIN number and completes the transaction without any difficulty. I want you to look carefully at the screen and tell me if you recognize the individual. She pressed play, and I watched the security footage with growing confusion. The image quality was grainy, but it clearly showed someone approaching the ATM, inserting a card, entering a PIN number, and completing a withdrawal transaction. The person wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, making identification difficult, but something about their posture and movements seemed familiar. Can you play it again? I asked, leaning closer to the screen. Detective Reynolds replayed the footage, and this time I focused on details beyond the person's face. The height, the build, the way they moved, the clothes they wore. A cold realization began to form in the pit of my stomach. Marcus, I whispered, turning to look at my son, who was sitting beside me. That person, they're wearing your jacket, the blue windbreaker with the white stripe. Marcus squinted at the screen, then shook his head. Mom, half the guys in Iowa probably have a jacket like that. You can't identify someone based on clothing. But I knew that jacket. I'd bought it for Marcus 2 Christmases ago, and it had a small tear near the left pocket that I'd offered to mend, but he'd never brought it over. In the security footage, I could just make out what looked like the same tear in the same location. Detective Reynolds paused the video and zoomed in on the person's clothing. Mrs. Walsh, do you have reason to believe you recognize this jacket? I looked at Marcus, hoping he'd offer some explanation, some proof that I was mistaken. Instead, I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. Not confusion or concern, but a flicker of panic quickly suppressed. Mom's memory issues have been getting worse, Marcus said to Detective Reynolds. She sometimes thinks she recognizes things that aren't really familiar. It's part of her condition. The dismissive way he spoke about my conditions stung, especially since he'd never described my memory problems that way before. Detective Reynolds made notes on her pad and asked if we needed to take a break before continuing. I'd like to see the footage one more time, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This time, I watched everything, the person's movements, their familiarity with the ATM, the confident way they entered the PIN number without hesitation. When the transaction was complete, the person turned slightly toward the camera before walking away, and for just a moment, I caught a glimpse of profile beneath the baseball cap. My heart stopped. Despite the sunglasses and hat, despite my desperate hope that I was wrong, I recognized the face on that screen. It was Marcus. Detective Reynolds must have seen something in my expression, because she asked Marcus to wait in the lobby while she spoke with me privately. Once we were alone, she played the footage again and asked for my honest assessment. "That's my son," I said quietly, the words feeling like they were ripping apart my chest. "I don't know how or why, but that's Marcus using my debit card." Detective Reynolds nodded grimly. "Mrs. Walsh, I have to ask you some difficult questions now. Has Marcus ever had access to your debit card? Has he ever seen you enter your PIN number?" I thought back over the past few months, all the times Marcus had helped me with errands and banking tasks. He'd driven me to the bank several times, waited while I made deposits and withdrawals, stood beside me at ATMs when I needed cash. He'd had dozens of opportunities to observe my PIN number without me realizing it. "He's helped me with banking several times," I admitted, "but I never thought. I mean, he's my son. Why would he steal from me?" Detective Reynolds' expression was compassionate, but professional. "Mrs. Walsh, financial abuse of elderly parents is more common than most people realize. It often happens gradually, starting with small amounts that the victim might not notice or might attribute to their own confusion." The missing cash from my coffee tin suddenly made horrible sense. Marcus had been visiting more frequently, had access to my house, knew about my memory issues. He could have been taking small amounts for months, counting on my confusion to cover his tracks. "What happens now?" I asked, feeling like my entire world was collapsing. "That depends on what you want to do. We have evidence of fraud, but since Marcus is your son and has had legitimate access to your home, prosecution would require your full cooperation and testimony." The thought of testifying against my own son, of sending him to jail, made me feel sick. But the alternative, letting him continue to steal from me while I questioned my own sanity, was equally unbearable. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. Detective Reynolds gave me her card and told me to call if I noticed any additional suspicious activity. She also recommended that I change my PIN again and avoid giving Marcus access to my financial information until the situation was resolved. The drive home was silent. Marcus seemed to sense that something had changed during my private conversation with Detective Reynolds, but he didn't ask directly what had been discussed. Instead, he made casual conversation about dinner plans and his job search in Cedar Falls. "I should probably head home tonight," he said as we pulled into my driveway. "I've got an early interview tomorrow for a customer service position at the credit union." Normally, I would have invited him to stay for dinner and tell me about the job opportunity. Instead, I simply nodded and got out of the car. Marcus seemed surprised by my lack of enthusiasm but didn't push for an explanation. "I'll call you tomorrow to see how you're feeling," he said as I walked toward my front door. "That's fine," I replied without turning around. That night, I sat in my living room staring at the security camera in the corner, wondering how many of my memory episodes had actually been cover-ups for Marcus's theft. How long had he been stealing from me? How much money had he taken while I blamed my own confused mind? The next morning, I called my bank and requested detailed statements for the past year, looking for any transactions I couldn't remember making. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Small cash withdrawals, usually for amounts under $100, scattered throughout the months. ATM transactions in Des Moines on days when my security footage showed I'd never left the house. Marcus had been systematically stealing from me for almost a year, taking amounts small enough that I'd attribute the missing money to my own memory problems. The $500 withdrawal had been a mistake. Too large to ignore, too obvious to explain away as my confusion. When Marcus called that evening to check on me, his voice had the same caring tone it had carried for months. But now I heard it differently, recognizing the manipulation beneath the concern. "How are you feeling today, Mom? Any more memory episodes?" "I'm fine," I said curtly. "You sound upset. Did something happen with the police investigation?" Marcus was fishing for information, trying to determine how much the detective had told me. His casual reference to my memory episodes now sounded like gaslighting, a deliberate attempt to make me doubt my own perceptions. "The investigation is ongoing," I said carefully. "Well, I'm sure they'll figure out what happened." These identity theft cases can be really complicated. After we hung up, I realized that Marcus had never once suggested the obvious solution to my banking problems, that I should stop using ATMs altogether and conduct all my banking inside the branch where security was better. Instead, he'd encouraged me to keep using my debit card while implementing security measures that he could easily circumvent. The full scope of his deception was staggering. Marcus hadn't just been stealing my money, he'd been manipulating my perception of reality, encouraging me to doubt my own memory and judgment. Every concerned phone call, every helpful suggestion, every expression of worry about my mental state had been part of an elaborate scheme to cover his theft. I spent the next week reviewing months of security footage, looking for evidence of Marcus's visits to my house and any suspicious behavior I might have missed. What I found was even more disturbing than I'd expected. There were several instances where Marcus had stayed later than I remembered, times when the footage showed him in my kitchen or living room after I'd apparently gone to bed. During one late-night visit in July, the camera captured Marcus searching through my purse while I slept on the living room couch. He'd carefully removed my debit card, photographed both sides with his phone, then returned it to my wallet. The entire process took less than 2 minutes, and he'd done it so quietly that I never woke up. Another piece of footage from August showed Marcus in my kitchen, going through the coffee tin where I kept household cash. He'd taken 2 $20 bills, carefully arranging the remaining money to make it look like nothing was missing. The timestamp showed this happened during a visit when he'd supposedly been helping me organize my medical appointments. The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. My son had been betraying my trust for months, stealing my money while pretending to be concerned about my welfare. Every memory lapse I'd experienced, every moment of confusion I'd attributed to aging, had been exploited by the person I trusted most in the world. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that my security cameras were just for monitoring my own behavior, a tool to help me understand my memory problems. He'd never realized that those same cameras were documenting his crimes in perfect detail. The footage would prove beyond any doubt that Marcus had been systematically stealing from me while gaslighting me about my mental state. When Detective Reynolds saw this evidence, there would be no question about prosecution. I had everything I needed to send my son to prison. The only question now was whether I had the strength to do it. I called Detective Reynolds the next morning and asked to meet with her as soon as possible. My voice was steady when I made the appointment, but my hands shook as I hung up the phone. I had spent the entire night reviewing security footage, documenting every instance of Marcus's theft and deception. By dawn, I had compiled a comprehensive timeline of his crimes spanning nearly 10 months. The hardest part wasn't gathering the evidence, it was accepting what the evidence meant. My son, the child I had raised and loved unconditionally, had been systematically exploiting my trust while convincing me I was losing my mind. Every tender moment of concern, every helpful gesture, every expression of worry about my memory had been calculated manipulation designed to cover his theft. Detective Reynolds arrived at my house within 2 hours of my call, bringing Officer Martinez with her to witness our conversation. I had prepared meticulously for this meeting, organizing printouts of security footage screenshots, bank statements, and a detailed written timeline of Marcus's visits and the corresponding thefts. "Mrs. Walsh, you sounded urgent on the phone," Detective Reynolds said as I led them into my living room. "Have there been additional incidents?" I gestured to the coffee table where I had spread out months of documentation. "I've been reviewing my security footage systematically, and I've discovered that the $500 withdrawal was just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus has been stealing from me for almost a year." Detective Reynolds and Officer Martinez examined the evidence I had compiled. Screenshot after screenshot showed Marcus searching through my purse, taking cash from my coffee tin, photographing my debit card, and conducting searches on my computer late at night. The timestamps proved that these activities had occurred during visits when I had been asleep or otherwise unaware of his actions. "This is substantial evidence of ongoing theft and elder abuse," Detective Reynolds said after reviewing the documentation. "Mrs. Walsh, I have to ask, are you prepared to press charges against your son?" The question hit me like a physical blow. even though I had been expecting it. Pressing charges meant destroying what remained of our relationship. It meant admitting publicly that I had been victimized by my own child. It meant accepting that the loving son I thought I knew had never really existed. "He's been making me think I was losing my mind," I said quietly. Every time money went missing, every time I questioned what was happening, he'd remind me about my memory problems and suggest that I was confused. He convinced me that I couldn't trust my own perceptions. Officer Martinez nodded grimly. "That's called gaslighting, and it's a common tactic in financial abuse cases. The perpetrator makes the victim doubt their own reality to avoid detection." Detective Reynolds explained the legal process that would follow if I decided to press charges. Marcus would be arrested and charged with multiple counts of theft and elder abuse. The evidence was so comprehensive that prosecution would be straightforward, but I would need to testify about his pattern of deception and manipulation. "I need to confront him first," I said finally. "I need to give him a chance to explain himself, to admit what he's done. Maybe if he confesses and agrees to pay back what he's stolen." Detective Reynolds shook her head firmly. "Mrs. Walsh, I strongly advise against confronting Marcus before we arrest him. If he realizes you have evidence of his crimes, he might flee or attempt to intimidate you into staying quiet." But I couldn't bring myself to have my son arrested without giving him an opportunity to come clean. Despite everything he had done, part of me still hoped there was some explanation, some circumstance that might make his actions understandable if not forgivable. "What if I wear a recording device during the confrontation?" I suggested. "That way, if he confesses, you'll have additional evidence. And if he threatens me or tries to manipulate me, that will be recorded too." After considerable discussion, Detective Reynolds agreed to this plan with strict conditions. I would wear a wire during my conversation with Marcus, and police would be stationed nearby in case the situation became dangerous. If Marcus admitted to the thefts, we would have his confession on tape. If he denied everything or became threatening, the recording would document his response. "Mrs. Walsh, you need to understand that this could be emotionally devastating," Detective Reynolds warned. "Confronting someone about this kind of betrayal rarely goes well. Are you sure you're prepared for whatever Marcus might say or do?" I wasn't prepared, but I needed to hear him admit what he had done. I needed to understand why he had chosen to victimize me rather than simply asking for help. Most importantly, I needed to know if there was any genuine remorse behind his calculated deception. I called Marcus that afternoon and asked him to come over for dinner the following evening. I kept my voice normal and casual, mentioning that I wanted to cook his favorite meal and discuss his job search progress. Marcus seemed pleased by the invitation and promised to arrive by 6 o'clock. That night, I practiced what I would say to him, rehearsing different approaches and preparing for various responses. I knew I needed to remain calm and avoid accusatory language that might cause him to shut down or become defensive. The goal was to get him talking, to let him incriminate himself through his own words. Detective Reynolds arrived at my house the next evening at 5 o'clock to help me set up the recording equipment. The wire was smaller than I had expected, barely visible beneath my sweater, with a tiny microphone that would pick up conversation clearly within a 10-foot radius. "Remember, Mrs. Walsh, your goal is to get Marcus talking about the missing money," Detective Reynolds explained as she tested the equipment. "Ask open-ended questions and let him fill in the details. Don't lead him towards specific admissions, but give him opportunities to confess voluntarily." Officer Martinez and 2 other officers positioned themselves in an unmarked van parked across the street from my house. If I said the code phrase, "I need some fresh air," they would enter immediately to ensure my safety. Marcus arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing the same blue windbreaker from the ATM security footage. Seeing that jacket in person confirmed beyond any doubt that he was the person who had stolen from me, but I forced myself to smile and accept his flowers graciously. "You look tired, Mom," Marcus said as he followed me into the kitchen. "Are you getting enough sleep? Any more memory episodes lately?" The casual way he asked about my memory episodes made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral. "I've been having some concerns about my finances," I said carefully as I stirred the pot roast. "There have been some transactions on my bank account that I don't remember making." Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, his posture relaxed and concerned. What kind of transactions? More mysterious withdrawals? A few ATM withdrawals in Des Moines that I definitely didn't make. The bank is investigating, but it's been very stressful trying to figure out what happened. That's really strange, Mom. Identity theft is getting so sophisticated these days. Criminals can clone cards and steal PIN numbers in all kinds of ways. Marcus shook his head sympathetically. Have the police made any progress with their investigation? I watched his face carefully as I answered. They recovered security footage from the ATM, but the person was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. It's hard to identify them clearly. Something flickered in Marcus's expression, relief perhaps, or satisfaction that his disguise had been effective. Well, hopefully they'll catch whoever did this. It's terrible that someone would take advantage of you when you're already dealing with memory issues. His continued references to my memory problems were infuriating, but I maintained my composure. Marcus, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Marcus straightened up, his casual demeanor becoming more alert. Of course, Mom. You can ask me anything. Have you ever taken money from my account? Ever borrowed cash from my house without asking? The question hung in the air between us like a live wire. Marcus's face went through a series of subtle changes. Surprise, hurt, indignation, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Mom, I can't believe you would ask me that. I would never steal from you. Never. His voice carried exactly the right note of wounded innocence, but his eyes didn't meet mine as he spoke. I'm not accusing you of stealing, I said gently. I'm asking if you might have borrowed money during one of my confused episodes. Maybe planning to pay it back before I noticed. Marcus shook his head emphatically. I have never taken a single penny from you without permission. Yes, I've borrowed money in the past, but I always asked first, and you always agreed. This suggestion that I would sneak around behind your back and steal from you is really hurtful. His denial was so convincing that for a moment I almost doubted what I had seen on the security footage. Marcus had always been persuasive, able to make people believe in him even when evidence suggested otherwise. But the cameras didn't lie, and I had documented proof of his crimes. The ATM footage shows someone who looks very much like you, I said carefully. Someone wearing a blue jacket identical to the one you're wearing right now. Marcus looked down at his jacket, then back at me with an expression of dawning understanding. Mom, are you seriously suggesting that I drove to Des Moines to steal money from your account? Do you realize how crazy that sounds? It sounds crazy to me too, which is why I'm asking for an explanation. Marcus walked over to where I stood by the stove and placed his hands on my shoulders in a gesture that once would have been comforting. Now it felt manipulative and invasive. Mom, I'm worried about you. These paranoid thoughts, these accusations against family members, this isn't normal forgetfulness. This sounds like something more serious. Maybe we need to talk to Dr. Martinez about adjusting your medication or getting you evaluated by a specialist. There it was, the classic deflection, the attempt to make me doubt my own perceptions by suggesting my mental state was deteriorating. Marcus was using my legitimate concerns about memory loss as a weapon against me, turning my vulnerabilities into tools for manipulation. My mind is perfectly clear right now, I said firmly. And I know what I saw on that security footage. Marcus dropped his hands from my shoulders and stepped back, his expression shifting from concern to frustration. If you're so convinced that I'm stealing from you, why don't you just call the police? Why go through this whole charade of making dinner and pretending everything is normal? Because you're my son and I love you. Because I wanted to give you a chance to tell me the truth and work together to fix this situation. Marcus laughed bitterly. Fix what situation? The situation where my own mother thinks I'm a thief? The situation where you're so paranoid and confused that you're accusing your only child of robbing you? His words stung, but I recognized them as manipulation tactics designed to make me back down and apologize for questioning him. Detective Reynolds had warned me that Marcus might try to turn the conversation around and make me feel guilty for confronting him. I found footage of you going through my purse while I was asleep, I said quietly. Multiple instances of you taking cash from my coffee tin. Pictures of you photographing my debit card. The evidence is overwhelming, Marcus. For the first time since the conversation began, Marcus looked genuinely shocked. His face went pale and he stared at me with an expression of disbelief and growing panic. You've been watching security footage of me? You've been spying on your own son? I've been trying to understand why money keeps disappearing from my accounts. The cameras were installed to monitor my own behavior during memory lapses, but they captured your theft instead. Marcus began pacing around my kitchen, running his hands through his hair in the nervous gesture I remembered from his childhood. But instead of evoking maternal sympathy, the familiar movement now seemed like a calculated performance. Even if the cameras show what you think they show, Marcus said slowly, there could be explanations. Maybe I was looking for something in your purse that you asked me to find. Maybe I was organizing your cash to help you keep track of it. You can't just assume the worst possible interpretation of everything. His attempts to reframe obvious theft as helpful behavior were so absurd that I almost laughed. But I could see that Marcus was testing different narratives, trying to find one that might create enough doubt to get him out of trouble. Marcus, I have footage of you photographing my debit card with your phone. How do you explain that? I don't know what you think you saw, but I would never do something like that. These memory issues are making you see things that aren't there. Interpret innocent actions as criminal behavior. Marcus was still clinging to the gaslighting strategy, still trying to convince me that I couldn't trust my own perceptions. But his denials were becoming more desperate, less convincing even to himself. The ATM withdrawal was made at the exact time the security footage shows you were in my house. I pressed. You used my PIN number, which means you had been watching me enter it during previous trips to the bank. This is insane, Marcus snapped. You're creating this elaborate conspiracy theory based on grainy security footage and your own paranoid delusions. I'm your son, not some criminal mastermind plotting to steal your pension money. His use of the word delusions was the final straw. Marcus knew exactly which buttons to push to make me doubt myself, but this time his manipulation tactics weren't working. I had too much evidence, too much proof of his systematic deception. I'm not delusional, and I'm not paranoid, I said with quiet dignity. I'm a woman who trusted her son and was betrayed by him repeatedly over the course of nearly a year. Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, cold calculation mixed with growing desperation. For the first time in our conversation, I saw him clearly without the mask of concern and affection he usually wore. Fine, he said finally. Let's say for the sake of argument that I did take some money from you. Let's say I made a few withdrawals from your account when I was short on cash. What exactly do you think that proves? The sudden shift from denial to partial admission caught me off guard, but I recognized it as another manipulation tactic. Marcus was trying to minimize his crimes by framing them as minor borrowing rather than systematic theft. It proves that you've been lying to me for months while stealing thousands of dollars from my accounts, I said steadily. Thousands of dollars? Marcus scoffed. Mom, you're being dramatic. Even if I did borrow some money here and there, we're talking about maybe a few $100s total. And I always planned to pay it back once my financial situation improved. His casual dismissal of the theft amounts was staggering. Marcus seemed genuinely convinced that stealing smaller amounts somehow made his crimes less serious, that his intentions to eventually repay the money justified his deception. Marcus, I've documented over $3,000 in unauthorized withdrawals and cash theft. That's not borrowing. That's stealing. $3,000? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. That's impossible. I never took anywhere near that much. I walked to the kitchen table, where I had left a folder containing printouts of bank statements and security footage screenshots. Marcus watched nervously as I opened the folder and spread out the evidence I had compiled. July 15th, ATM withdrawal of $150. July 23rd, cash missing from my coffee tin. August 2nd, ATM withdrawal of $200. August 9th, more cash missing. I continued reading through the documented thefts while Marcus stood frozen beside the table. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Dates, amounts, photographic proof of his presence in my house during each incident. Marcus stared at the documentation with growing horror, finally understanding the scope of what I had discovered. "How long have you been collecting this information?" he asked quietly. "Since I realized that my memory problems weren't causing the missing money. Since I understood that someone was deliberately stealing from me while making me think I was losing my mind." Marcus sank into one of my kitchen chairs, his head in his hands. For several minutes he said nothing, and I could hear the tick of my wall clock marking the passage of time. When he finally looked up, his expression was defeated but still calculating. "Mom, I can explain everything. The situation is more complicated than it looks." "I'm listening." Marcus took a deep breath and launched into what I recognized as a carefully constructed narrative designed to generate sympathy and minimize responsibility. He spoke about his mounting debts, his failed business ventures, his desperation to avoid bankruptcy. He described watching me live comfortably on my pension, while he struggled to make rent and buy groceries. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said with what appeared to be genuine remorse. "It started with just $20 from your coffee tin when I needed gas money. I told myself I'd pay it back as soon as I got my next paycheck, but then other emergencies came up." Marcus painted a picture of himself as a victim of circumstances, forced into theft by financial desperation and the unfairness of life. He claimed that my comfortable retirement made him resentful, that seeing me worry about losing small amounts of money when he was facing eviction seemed absurd. "You have to understand, Mom, I was drowning. My credit cards were maxed out, my rent was 3 months behind, and I couldn't even afford food some weeks. When I saw you sitting on thousands of dollars in savings while I was facing homelessness, it seemed unfair." His attempt to justify theft by claiming financial need was both pathetic and infuriating. Marcus was asking me to sympathize with his decision to steal from his own mother rather than simply asking for help or finding legitimate solutions to his problems. "Why didn't you just ask me for help?" I asked. "If you were really facing eviction and starvation, why didn't you tell me what was happening?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Because I knew you'd lecture me about my poor financial decisions. Because I was ashamed of failing again. Because asking for help felt like admitting I was a complete loser who couldn't take care of himself. So instead, you decided to steal from me while convincing me I was losing my mind? I never meant for you to blame yourself or think you had memory problems," Marcus said quickly. "When you started worrying about the missing money, I panicked. I didn't know how to explain where it had gone without confessing what I'd done." This was perhaps the most infuriating lie of all. Marcus had deliberately encouraged my concerns about memory loss, had suggested that my confusion was evidence of deteriorating mental health, had recommended that I see a doctor about cognitive decline. His systematic gaslighting had been intentional and calculated. "Marcus, you specifically told me that my memory problems were getting worse. You suggested I needed medication adjustments and specialist evaluations. You made me doubt my own sanity to cover up your theft." Marcus's face flushed red with embarrassment or anger. "I was trying to protect both of us. If you had figured out that I was taking the money, it would have destroyed our relationship. I thought it was better for you to think you were having senior moments than to know your son was stealing from you." The twisted logic of his reasoning was staggering. Marcus had convinced himself that psychological abuse was preferable to honesty, that making me question my mental faculties was somehow kinder than admitting his crimes. "You thought it was better for me to believe I had dementia than to know you needed help?" I asked incredulously. "I thought I could pay everything back before you noticed the full extent of what was missing. I had some investments that were supposed to pay off, some business opportunities that should have worked out. If those deals had gone through, I could have replaced all the money and you never would have known." Marcus was still living in a fantasy world where his get-rich-quick schemes might actually succeed, where he could magically undo months of theft through some miraculous windfall. His delusions about easy money had led him to steal from me in the first place, and he was still clinging to those same unrealistic hopes. "What about the PIN number? How did you get access to my debit card account?" Marcus looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. I watched you enter it at the bank. You never tried to hide it from me, and after seeing it a few times, I memorized the numbers." The casual way he described violating my trust was chilling. Marcus had deliberately observed my private financial information during moments when I trusted him completely, then used that information to steal from me repeatedly. "The $500 withdrawal was a mistake," he continued. "I was desperate because my landlord was threatening eviction, and I thought I could take a larger amount just once and then stop. But the bigger withdrawal made you suspicious in a way that the smaller amounts hadn't. So you decided to double down on the gaslighting instead of confessing?" Marcus flinched at the word gaslighting but didn't deny the accusation. "I was scared, Mom. Once I realized you were investigating the missing money, I knew that if you found out the truth, you'd never forgive me. I thought if I could just maintain the confusion for a little longer, I might find a way to fix everything." His admission was both a relief and a heartbreak. Marcus had finally acknowledged his crimes, but his justifications revealed a level of selfishness and delusion that made forgiveness seem impossible. He had been willing to destroy my mental health to protect himself from consequences. "How much money did you actually steal from me, Marcus? I want the real number, not your minimized version." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, apparently calculating figures in his head. "Probably around $4,000 total, including the cash from your house and all the ATM withdrawals." $4,000. More than I had initially calculated, representing months of systematic theft from a mother who had always supported him unconditionally. The amount was significant enough to have impacted my financial security, but apparently insignificant enough that Marcus felt justified in taking it. "Do you have any of that money left? Any way to pay back what you've stolen?" Marcus shook his head miserably. "It's all gone, Mom. Rent, car payments, credit card bills, groceries. I wasn't using your money for luxuries or anything frivolous. I was just trying to survive." His claim that the theft was motivated by basic survival needs might have been more sympathetic if he hadn't also been lying about his job prospects and financial situation. Marcus had been presenting himself as someone actively seeking stable employment, while actually living off money stolen from his mother. "What about the job interviews you've been telling me about? The customer service position at the credit union?" Marcus's face reddened again. "There haven't been any real interviews. I've been applying for jobs online, but no one wants to hire someone with my employment history. Too many failed businesses, too many gaps in my resume." Another lie exposed. Marcus had been fabricating job prospects to maintain the illusion that he was working toward financial independence while actually planning to continue stealing from me indefinitely. "So what was your long-term plan, Marcus? Were you going to keep stealing from me until my accounts were empty? Were you planning to eventually move back to Cedar Falls so you could monitor my finances more closely?" The question seemed to surprise him, as if he hadn't really considered the long-term implications of his actions. "I don't know, Mom. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was just trying to get through each month without being evicted or having my car repossessed." His admission that he had no plan beyond continued theft was perhaps the most damaging revelation of all. Marcus hadn't stolen from me as a temporary solution to a specific crisis. He had been treating my savings account as his personal emergency fund with no intention of stopping. "The police know everything, Marcus. I've already shown them all the evidence I collected. They're waiting for me to decide whether to press charges." Marcus's face went white. "You called the police? Mom, you can't be serious about sending your own son to jail over some money that I fully intended to pay back." "You had no way to pay it back. You've admitted that you have no job, no income, and no realistic prospects for earning the money you've stolen." "But I'm family," Marcus said desperately. "We can work this out between ourselves. I'll get a job, any job, and I'll pay you back a little bit each month until the debt is cleared. Please don't involve the legal system in a family matter." His plea might have been more convincing if he had shown genuine remorse for the psychological damage his crimes had caused. Marcus seemed focused entirely on avoiding legal consequences, not on understanding the harm he had inflicted on my mental and emotional well-being. "This stopped being a family matter when you decided to steal from me while making me think I was losing my mind," I said firmly. "You didn't just take my money, Marcus. You made me doubt my own sanity. You convinced me that I couldn't trust my own perceptions. I never meant for it to go that far, but it did go that far. For months, I believed that I was developing dementia. I was terrified that I was following the same path as my mother, losing my mind piece by piece. You saw me suffering with those fears, and you encouraged them to cover up your theft. Marcus buried his face in his hands again. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. I know I screwed up, but please don't destroy my life over this. A criminal conviction would follow me forever. I'd never be able to get a decent job or rebuild my life. His concern for his own future prospects while dismissing the damage he had caused to my life was revealing. Marcus still saw himself as the primary victim in this situation, someone whose promising future was being threatened by consequences for his own actions. You destroyed your own life when you chose to steal from your mother instead of asking for help, I said quietly. You destroyed our relationship when you decided that my mental health was less important than avoiding embarrassment about your failures. It doesn't have to be destroyed forever, Marcus said urgently. If you don't press charges, we can work through this as a family. I'll get counseling, I'll find steady work, I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. But trust, once broken so thoroughly, couldn't be repaired with promises and good intentions. Marcus had shown me exactly who he was when he thought he could get away with it. Someone willing to exploit his mother's vulnerabilities for financial gain. Someone capable of psychological manipulation and systematic deception. The trust is gone, Marcus. Even if you paid back every penny you stole, I could never feel safe around you again. How could I ever know if your concern was genuine or just another manipulation? Marcus began crying then. Tears that might have been genuine remorse or might have been another performance designed to generate sympathy. After months of deception, I found it impossible to distinguish between his authentic emotions and his calculated attempts to avoid consequences. Please, Mom. I'm begging you, don't press charges. Give me one chance to make this right. I'll sign papers promising to pay you back. I'll agree to whatever terms you want. Just don't send me to prison. His desperation was palpable, but it didn't change the fundamental reality of what he had done. Marcus had committed serious crimes against his own mother, and no amount of pleading could undo the damage he had caused. I need some fresh air, I said quietly, using the code phrase that would summon Detective Reynolds and the other officers. Marcus looked confused by my sudden need for air, but he didn't try to stop me as I walked toward the front door. Within seconds, I heard car doors slamming and the sound of footsteps approaching my house. Mrs. Walsh, is everything all right? Detective Reynolds called out as she knocked on my door. Everything's fine, please come in, I replied. Marcus stood up abruptly as Detective Reynolds and Officer Martinez entered my kitchen, his face showing shock and betrayal as he realized I had been working with the police all along. Marcus Martinez, you're under arrest for multiple counts of theft and elder abuse, Detective Reynolds announced as Officer Martinez moved to handcuff him. Mom, you can't do this to me, Marcus said as the handcuffs clicked into place. I'm your son. This is going to ruin my entire life. You ruined your own life, I replied sadly. And you tried to ruin mine in the process. As the officers led Marcus toward the door, he made one final attempt at manipulation. When you're lying in a nursing home someday with no family left to visit you, remember that you chose to put your own son in prison over a few $1,000s. His words were intended to hurt, to make me feel guilty for holding him accountable for his crimes. But instead of pain, I felt only relief that I would never again have to wonder whether his expressions of love were genuine or calculated. Detective Reynolds stayed behind after Marcus was taken away to finalize the details of the case and remove the recording equipment. The wire had captured everything. Marcus's initial denials, his eventual partial confession, his admission of the full scope of his theft, and his final attempt at emotional manipulation. Mrs. Walsh, I have to tell you, that was one of the most comprehensive confessions I've ever recorded, Detective Reynolds said as she packed up the surveillance equipment. Between the security footage and tonight's recording, the prosecution will have an ironclad case. What happens next? I asked. Marcus will be formally charged and arraigned within 48 hours. Given the amount of money involved and the systematic nature of the crimes, he's likely looking at significant jail time. The elder abuse charges carry additional penalties because of your age and the psychological manipulation involved. The legal process would take months to complete, but Detective Reynolds assured me that Marcus would be unlikely to make bail given his lack of employment and assets. I wouldn't have to worry about him returning to my house or attempting to intimidate me into dropping the charges. That night, I sat in my living room reviewing the security footage one final time before deleting the files. Month after month of deception, documented in perfect digital clarity. Marcus searching through my belongings, stealing my cash, photographing my personal information, all while presenting himself as a loving and concerned son. But mixed in with the evidence of his crimes were moments that had seemed genuine at the time. Marcus helping me with household tasks, listening patiently to my concerns about memory loss, offering comfort during my most frightened moments. Even now, knowing what I knew about his motives, some of those interactions looked authentic. That was perhaps the cruelest aspect of his deception. Marcus hadn't been entirely fake in his concern for me. He had genuinely worried about my well-being even as he exploited my vulnerabilities. He had loved me in his own selfish way while simultaneously betraying me in the most fundamental manner possible. The trial took place 6 months later. Marcus pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, avoiding the need for me to testify about the psychological damage his crimes had caused. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution, though the judge acknowledged that recovery of the stolen funds was unlikely given Marcus's financial situation. I attended the sentencing hearing, but chose not to give a victim impact statement. Everything I might have said about betrayal, manipulation, and broken trust had already been captured in the security footage and recorded confession. The evidence spoke more eloquently than any speech I could have delivered. Marcus looked different in his orange jumpsuit, younger somehow, diminished by the consequences of his actions. He made eye contact with me once during the proceedings, and I saw something in his expression that might have been genuine remorse. But it was too late for apologies, too late for explanations or promises of reform. After the sentencing, I drove home to my quiet house on Maple Street and began the process of rebuilding my life. I kept the security cameras not because I feared future crime, but because they had taught me an important lesson about trusting evidence over emotions. The footage had shown me reality when my heart wanted to believe in lies. I changed my banking procedures, established new financial safeguards, and gradually began to trust my own memory again. The senior moments that had worried me so much disappeared once I stopped doubting my perceptions and started believing in my own competence. Mrs. Henderson next door became a closer friend, and I joined a book club at the local library where I met other women who had survived their own family betrayals. We never spoke directly about our experiences, but there was an understanding among us, a recognition of shared resilience. A year after Marcus's sentencing, I received a letter from him in prison. He wrote about the counseling programs he was attending, his growing understanding of the harm he had caused, his hope that someday I might be able to forgive him. The letter seemed sincere, but I had learned not to trust appearances where Marcus was concerned. I never replied to his letter, and I never visited him in prison. Some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome, some trust too thoroughly shattered to rebuild. Marcus had made his choices, and now he would live with the consequences. I kept living in my house on Maple Street, tending my garden and reading my mystery novels. The difference was that now I trusted myself completely, my memory, my perceptions, my ability to distinguish truth from manipulation. I had learned the hard way that sometimes the people who claim to love us most are the ones most willing to exploit our vulnerabilities. The security cameras still recorded everything, a permanent reminder that evidence matters more than emotion, that documentation trumps trust, and that even the most sophisticated deception leaves traces for those wise enough to look for them. I had become my own detective, my own protector, my own most reliable witness, and I had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is holding someone accountable for their actions, even when that someone is your own child. Especially when that someone is your own child. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.